Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Kanalakis. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation. Thank you all for coming. This is one of my favorite topics, and I'm really excited for our panel. So I'll just start off by introducing each of them, and then I have a few questions, but I also want this to be really engaging, and so I want all of you to jump in and ask questions, and let's make this really interactive. So first, I'll start with Julia from IDEO. She's a designer and currently leads design research at IDEO.org in San Francisco. Prior to joining IDEO, Julia worked in Germany designing mobile games and location-based services. She also worked in the Netherlands and in Brazil designing healthcare, learning, and consumer electronics products. She has a BA in Communications and a Master of Science in Engineering from Sao Paulo, Brazil, University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, as well as a Professional Engineering Doctorate in User System Interaction from Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. That's an awesome doctorate. Yeah. Wow. I'm glad that exists. Next up, we have Will, who's an anthropologist and a designer working at the intersection of human behavior and design. He's passionate about designing solutions that improve individuals' access to educational, financial, and other important resources in their communities. He graduated from Wesleyan in Connecticut, where he studied cultural anthropology and was a 2015 Code for America Fellow in Albuquerque. And he's currently doing user experience research at Facebook. And finally, Clara is a design researcher with a degree in social anthropology from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. So we have we have a lot of anthropology. Yeah, it's great. For over 8 years, Clara has been researching for corporate, nonprofit, and startup clients using ethnographic research to understand fundamental user behavior through observation and in-depth interviews. Clara was a Code for America Fellow the year before Will in 2014, where she worked in Puerto Rico. And she will soon be starting a really awesome fellowship at the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship program at Stanford. Well, I mean, I had a few questions that I'd put together, but I think your questions that you raised were really excellent. So I'm going to try and sort of weave some of those themes in. But I thought it'd be helpful to just start with a brief sort of definition that you would all have, and what is human-centered design. I'm going to start with Julia because IDEO has really been a leader in this space, and I bet you can recite it in your sleep. So, yeah, how would you define human-centered design?
I think if you ask 10 people, they're going to have at least 5 different answers for you. I'm going to say, from IDEO's perspective, what human-centered design is. So human-centered design is a process to design products and services, and it's comprised of 3 phases, basically. Inspiration, ideation, and implementation. And especially in the ideation phase, we have several loops of iteration where we go back and we show the design to the users of the products and services we're designing for. And we iterate, and we iterate again, and we iterate before we implement. And I think what is really different with human-centered design, at least in the way that we practice, is the focus specifically in the beginning of the process in users. So the inspiration phase is basically all the designers together, not only the researcher, but all the designers together going into the field and empathizing with the users of the products and services we're designing for, creating deep empathy. And there are many methods in which you're going to do that. So it's not about asking people what they want, because we will never expect people to know what they want, right? Like Ford said, if we ask people what they want, they're going to say a faster horse, right? So you're not going to get an answer from people, but you're going to get inspired by listening to the unmet needs that people have. So the inspiration phase is really crucial, and it's through the process of synthesizing that data collaboratively with your team. So it's a very collaborative process. It's by synthesizing that data and coming up with patterns is that in that data, which is a super messy process. People get super frustrated throughout this process. Who did that before knows. But is that through the process of synthesizing that data and finding patterns is where you're going to find opportunities to design something new. And that's really the core of how human-centered design treats research very differently from market research, for example. Market research doesn't do that translation from what you hear in the field to what design opportunities are. And that's the core thing. That's why the process is super important. So I guess that's just a...
I can add a little bit. So basically, I'm not gonna, that's a perfect definition, so obviously, but in research, we say something that it's like what people say and what people do, it's different, you know, and this is not because we are schizophrenic, it's because you are like, or we are probably human, but like in some ways, like it has to do with, well, you, in this intersection of what people say that is aspirational and what people do, which is behavioral, it's where you encounter the insights, is where you, so by observing, it's where you know, like get the real data. And kind of what she says also, like with the whole focus on the users, it's not only, it's a great practice also when answering a little bit of the questions about the stakeholders, because when you put the focus in the user, you are removing yourself and others' stakeholders' opinions. It's not about politics, it's not about what you think, it's about what we just, you know, encounter, you know, in the field, what we just, patterns that we just observe from the users. That said, I think it's a great, you know, collaboration tool in order to do that, to kind of get everyone on the same page, get everyone kind of a shared vision and a shared goals, so that everyone remove themselves, which probably in government, in any big, you know, team, it happens. You kind of have all these people having opinions. If you remove yourself and you just put it on the user, then you kind of, you just don't have to fight for that anymore, you know. And having that said, like in this inspirational phase, it's great when you get the stakeholders to go with you to the sessions, to be there, to participate, so that you kind of prove in firsthand that the users are saying X, Y, Z.
I think that you all did a great job describing, you know, the process and defining it. I would just add one other thing. I think that, you know, as you both have mentioned, you know, it really focuses on people problems. So it's not, as Clara was saying, it's not internal problems, organizational problems. It's really what people are experiencing and focusing on, you know, their experience and their journey and all their behaviors. So, you know, when you're understanding a user, it really is about how they are moving through a process and where those gaps are. And, you know, and then that's how I approach it, is really from, you know, gap analysis perspective of really understanding where the deficiencies in a process, you know, and focusing on, make sure that your solution is evidence-based and not on, as Clara was saying, an assumption or a bias.
That's great. Yeah, so I think, well, I mean, I think it's always really interesting to sort of talk about these concepts in high level and in sort of abstract. But I think when you really start to understand it is when you hear about the examples and the experiences and you know, challenges. So I'd love for each of you to share an experience that you've had using this methodology, and then if possible, if you could sort of respond to what some of the folks in the room brought up, you know, either around accessibility, you know, redesign versus refresh, something being beautiful versus effective. You know, if you could touch on maybe some of those points, that would be great.
So I think my first kind of attempt was after failing miserably with a startup where I didn't implement any user. And it's kind of shameful because I'm a researcher, so I guess it kind of didn't make sense. I guess like I couldn't bridge, you know, build a bridge between my background as a researcher with the product development, you know, in technology. There was something there that didn't click. And so we failed miserably. That's how I met Krista at Startup Chile. And we empathize. So, and then after there, I moved to the US, and then that's where I kind of start, getting into, technology, and things are happening in Silicon Valley, like human-centered design, IDEO, design thinking. And I became a fellow at Code for America. And that's when we fully implemented the process. The thing with Code for America, which I think it might be different maybe with you guys kind of working together with government, is just like I work with the government of Puerto Rico, but the governments apply, as much as we fellows apply to be fellows, they apply to be governments and participate, getting a group of fellows. So they kind of know a little bit what is it about Code for America. They get a little bit human-centered design in general. That said, not maybe all of the governments. In my case, Puerto Rico, the CIO was a young guy coming from the private sector, so he totally get it. So we kind of didn't have that issue of like how to kind of sell to stakeholders, or it was super, easy to get into, and his crew kind of got it as well. That said, when I work with other departments, we still had to, kind of get them, involved in like what it was and how we could approach together. So we work on, the first kind of going more into methodology, like we did a ton of interviews. We probably did 100 interviews with the whole spectrum that we could. It was like kind of high-level positions, the workers, the real people working, and then the business, because we were working on economic development, business side, entrepreneurs and like kind of investors, just to get a little bit of what the ecosystem looks like and kind of to be able to approach the whatever we will build in terms of systems. So we want to identify the different components of the system. And we did a lot of interviews. We synthesized, and one piece of advice here, or whatever really works for us, is like as a team, we kind of, we didn't know each other, so obviously it's different than starting a startup, but like we make sure that we were sharing the same vision, that we were sharing the same goals, that as a team we were one voice. You don't want to just kind of go to government or any, sell something and you are like kind of debating, amongst yourself. So we kind of make sure that was our priority, and then we make sure that the government, that the people we were working with share the same vision that we share. And also that was kind of an interesting approach, because then it was not about us, it was about a vision, and it was about like something and the vision was obviously on certain users that we wanted to help, by providing a better service. We did a lot of, synthesize, we individually and then like as a group, and then we came up with areas of opportunity that we presented to the government. We as a team, before presenting the opportunities, we wanted to make sure that we were passionate about the opportunities we were presenting, because we needed to be as, engaged with the problem as much as they were. Once we agreed on that, we decided to work with small business owners. And since then, we always kept not only the stakeholders, but the business owners on the loop. We did co-design sessions. We always kept them not only in the inspiration phase, but in the ideation and in the implementation. We always build these low or high, whatever, fidelity prototypes, and we test them with that. And
was there a specific moment in that process where you said, because you had done that user research and those interviews, that it just sort of made something go faster, or there's something where you're like, that was so valuable that we did that?
Those interviews were key for me for like, they are as important to gain information, but at the same time to build relationship and get trust. Like this empathy that she's mentioning, that Julia mentioned, you get so much when you build that empathy and when you build trust. And the government of Puerto Rico had something that is like, they had a consulting agency coming, charging billions of dollars and leaving, kind of a black hole. It's like almost like I couldn't avoid like thinking of like it's kind of going to Iraq, leaving, and then coming back. It's kind of like this, you leave like something there that it's maybe it's not the best analogy, but it is. So it's like, it's kind of, we wanted to empower them. We don't want it to be just those guys coming, building the solution and leaving. And I think this is key. It's like, we wanted to give them the right tools. We wanted to help them. Another thing that happened is like the government had this thing. It's like, and I think it might happen in different ways. It's like we needed to talk to the high level positions so that they can give they will give permission to kind of the workers to go for it. And I feel like that's, we needed to do both, but in some way, like that kind of helped, like kind of build this, collaboration. It's, I don't know, it's like definitely there's an organization, and I don't want to go in detail, but yeah, I don't know if any, is there anything?
No, let's hear some more practical examples.
Yeah. So I'll also refer to my Code for America experience. I work with the city of Albuquerque, and we are working in economic development and workforce development, kind of an intersection of those spaces. And we had, I think our big problem was that we had a really broad kind of area of research. So for us, it was, our big mistake was not having a clear direction in research. And so, I think my approach is always to have a really clear direction, whether or not it's a hypothesis or something, a starting point that everyone, as Clara mentioned, agrees with. Because I think we spend a lot of time, kind of going back and forth and not really knowing, what to make choices on and having, again, that clear direction. So, whenever, it sounds very obvious, but I think it's very easy to stray away from your initial, from having a very clear research question. What are you trying to learn more about, and and having those things really laid out. And I think also another thing that is important in the process is really beginning with, writing out your assumptions and your biases, separating those two things, as we've been talking about, from the actual research, and then at the end, kind of measuring those two things together. But so back to Code for America, it was just it was really, it was very, broad, kind of blue sky research, but it would have been much more helpful if we had a clearer scope for our research, because it will help guide us and we can move quicker and more effectively through that process.
Great. And Julia, if you could describe a project and then also maybe talk about some of the challenges that you've experienced in introducing human-centered design that maybe some of these folks are facing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was thinking about the breaking the silos thing, and I think like bringing partners and clients along the process can be very, very difficult, because like I was talking about inspiration, ideation, and implementation, and this process is pretty messy. So in the beginning, when we are doing inspiration research, we really get really broad in which like all the directions you could go through, and it's through synthesis that you focus again, and then you do ideation and brainstorming, and you open it again, and then you do some user feedback sessions, and then you focus again, and then you prototype again, and in each iteration loop, you're opening again and closing again. And this is it's excruciating from some people to have like this process of like opening and closing. It's like embracing ambiguity is one of our values at IDEO, and it's so hard for people. I experienced clients at the end of the process crying and like hugging us and saying like, oh my gosh, this was cathartic, like it was amazing. Because like going through this process and like being optimistic and saying like, this is gonna work, it's really what you have to be the mirror. So you have to have this aptitude, you have to be optimistic, you have to embrace ambiguity, you have to show these values, and it's through practice that you bring people along. We can speak here for hours about how great human-centered design is. If you don't go out and you practice, we're not going to convince you. So it's really through practice that you bring people along. And collaboration is hard, especially if people speak different languages. And that's what often happens. And at IDEO, we always have multidisciplinary teams, like people from different disciplines working together. And you get used to this. In the beginning, it's super uncomfortable because we speak different languages, and at some point, we're all kind of like, we get used to each other, right? But it's hard. From one project, you have 16 weeks to do this. So being humble and listening, sometimes it's really hard to listen, but if you are in a process of synthesizing data, and coming back to what you were saying, like, we have what we call phase 0 projects, which means blue sky. Like the client or the partner comes to us and say, we just need to innovate, and we don't know where, and we don't know in which sector. Discover for us. Blue sky, like, I don't know, we go into the field, like, and we come back with like lots of patterns and different things that different directions in which we can go through, and through synthesis, collaboratively analyzing that data through synthesis is where we come through some directions. And agreeing in those directions is where you bring that that focus that sometimes misses in projects. Like, everyone has to be in the synthesis, and everyone has to be in research, because otherwise you don't get to a common agreement of what's the direction. I think that's really important. Don't go alone in research. Bring your team with you, I think, and bring your partners with you. Is that an answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's awesome.
I have a practical thing that works.
Sure.
So what we did, in order, like, because what is happening with the government is, like, the high level was telling kind of the people, like, okay, you gotta participate. And for us, it was like, we just don't want them to be forced to get it. We want them to embrace, the human center. So what we did was like kind of a quick win with them. And it really worked out not only as a quick win, that so we kind of used this matrix where we put like kind of, and this is after during the ideation process. So we had kind of came up with some ideas, and we were high impact, low impact, short-term, long-term. And we decided, okay, what can we do in high impact short-term, because we want a quick win. And we did this kind of super simple step-by-step on how to start a business, which it's just an information, like nice design page. But we asked them to write the content, the people that was working with us. So it was kind of a way for them to not only collaborate and be together, but also to understand like how like a small thing, has had a big impact. And then we focus the rest of the year in the big, application. But I think these quick wins have like a lot of interesting, things behind. Helps for the team.
Momentum.
Yeah, exactly. And also this idea of ownership that sometimes you don't have in government or in anything. It's like, so they kind of, it belongs to them as well, as much as it belongs to the citizens. So I think it had like kind of, it's a small tip that maybe works,
Great. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to leave enough time for everyone in the room to ask any questions to our wonderful panelists. Judy.
So this question is coming from Arvinder Kang of Community Logic. How do you balance the demand for design aesthetics versus functional aesthetics? What has been your experience in customer feedback when having to choose one or the other in this era of design renaissance?
Great question.
I think for me, it's very simple. The utility is always, overshadows how it looks. I think the visual elements are very, very important, but they always come secondary to the actual functionality of the product. And so, it's an additional piece that is valuable. But again, as some people have mentioned, even if you have a redesign and it looks nice, and if it doesn't work still, then it'll fall flat. So it's really important to make sure that you're still aligning this new kind of visual template with actual user needs, and it's still solving a problem in a new and intuitive and interesting way.
Yeah, I kind of agree, like how it feels and how it looks. The thing is, and I will put the priority. Today there's so many templates and stuff, like visual stuff out there, that it's kind of it's more important really how it works. And if not, we have the example of Craigslist. Nothing like that has less style, and still it works, and people use it, and for some reason or other they haven't changed it over time because it works. So you kind of move, but still you can do something with really, few things like to make it look nice. I think I agree with him.
Yeah, I don't know.
Any other questions in the room? Thoughts?
Actually, I wanted to answer to a question about Steve was talking about, you're doing rapid prototyping for the transportation, right? And rapid prototyping appeared a little more. At IDEO.org, we're doing rapid prototyping and live prototyping extensively in Africa before we get to piloting programs. And we are talking about prototypes that are affecting people's lives. Like, it's really serious stuff. And I think that what is really like having what is showing to be successful to us is to really do rapid prototyping, rough prototyping, in a very small scale, and then you get a little bigger, you iterate, and you get a little bigger, and you go live, meaning you let the prototype live by itself for a month in a very small sample of your region, of your area, of your amount of users. And you iterate and you fix it before you really go to a full pilot. Because I think especially for the social sector and the public sector, what can burn us is to really go live before you're really ready. So making sure that you choose a specific area where you really can be contingent to if things go wrong, because things can go very wrong, and really make it work well before you grow. It's awesome, and it also showed to us that you can get a lot of backing from your partners if they understand that the risk is contingent. Contingent, is that word in English? Okay.
Well, I thought it would be great to hear from the panel around how do you balance the needs of different users, right? So you're doing, you're hearing different things from different users. How do you synthesize that? How do you sort of assess the trade-offs for making those decisions around the design?
Yeah, I think it goes also back to what Clara was saying around where's the opportunity, big, small, and prioritizing, if I made one change, what would the impact of that change be? And so I think oftentimes in services and applications and tools, we try to pack way too much. Too many needs into one platform, and that's a very, obviously, feature creep is a very, very dangerous space to be in because it's not going to really satisfy everyone. There's an opportunity cost of obviously doing one thing over another. So sometimes it's best just to figure out where the biggest impact is of one user, and then perhaps that might be one tool and build another one. But I think trying to find a way to prioritize, based on impact, and obviously that's what your stakeholders are going to, value the most is where's the biggest impact that we can achieve, whether it be engagement or financial. So yeah, kind of prioritize based on impact is my typical way. I don't know. Anyone else?
I think the best way, I remember like 10 years ago, maybe more, we were doing like those use case scenarios, like UML. Has anyone like done that 10 years ago? Like where you have like little people and like what are like all the case scenario, and like we would get like totally lost in that thing, right? And but it was like super systematic, and it's a way to prioritize like use cases. But I think like today, my recommendation would be make your prototype, show it to all the stakeholders, and understand what is the impact, and iterate. And make it again. Be super physical as soon as you can, and in a prototype that communicate your idea, show them to all your stakeholders, all your different users, and get feedback. And then you're going to understand where to go. And I can give you an example. Maybe I don't know if I had time. We were doing a live prototyping in Kenya for a youth reproductive health program that was serving girls in rural communities, giving access to contraception to them. And one of the things that we want to try was to bypass community leaders and give access to girls to contraception without community leader engagement. Because girls in Kenya, they can get access to contraception even if they're not adults, like minors, right? It failed terribly because we knew it was risky. We knew that community engagement was important, but we want to try. We want to try to see if that was possible. And it failed terribly. So in the next iteration, we redesigned the program to make sure that we were involving community leaders as well before we started serving girls in the program. So just like one example, we knew it was risky, but we wanted to try. And if we haven't done prototyping, we wouldn't know.
Is there another question from our live stream?
Okay, so this question comes from SyncFab. How do you see generative design affecting human-centered design? Can they coexist? And what is in store for human-centered design as we shift away from screens to more immersive digital experiences that sink into our lives?
You're gonna have to repeat that. So like,
A double barrel question.
How do you see generative design affecting human-centered design? Can they coexist? And what is in store for human-centered design as we shift away from screens to more immersive digital experiences that sink into our lives? I'm assuming virtual reality.
VR, yeah. Yeah. Big question.
I think they can coexist for sure. Why not? They can definitely coexist. Generative design by itself for me is art. You know, it can work or not, but it's more in the realm of art. I can't think of design without the human perspective at this point in my life. And especially because we're moving toward a more immersive experience, we need human-centered design, I think. What I understood as generative design is a design just comes from within, right? Like without, is that what it is? Like without, it's not human-centered. It's like you thinking from your head what would be a perfect intuition-driven, which is great. Like we have, Steve Jobs used to say that he would never ask people, right? Like he was applying generative design to Apple, and he was a genius. He made it, right? But I'm not a genius, so I don't practice generative design. Yeah.
Generative design is the design method in which the output, image, sound, architectural models of animation is generated by a set of rules or an algorithm, normally used by a computer.
Oh, machine learning.
Oh, okay.
Can you repeat that just briefly?
Okay, so generative design. It's a design
Created by an
Rules or
algorithm.
an algorithm.
Yeah.
Well, it's machine learning. It kind of brings out what happened just with Facebook algorithm that I think you know more.
Right.
Like the
Sure.
news that even like you still human need to kind of
Right.
we still need human to like kind of go through the news, like you know what I'm saying.
Right,
It's
yeah,
like it's still you still need the human intervention to kind of like filter or screen, and that's the whole supposedly scandal that happened with Facebook in the news, with. But yeah, I think I agree with her in some way. I just think like human, we are still gonna need humans, like hopefully. Otherwise, we are all out of business. But we're still gonna need humans for a long time, to filter, to like test, to talk. It's even design. It's just on its core, it's human. So yeah.
Okay.
I heard
Just one last. Yep.
I asked the same question, and I'm not going to get the answer right of someone who worked in human design, but they said like machine learning can give you the answers, but it can't tell you why.
Yeah.
So it can tell you why it can give you 90% of the people shop here and do this, but not why they do it. And that's where the interaction of human-centered design was so important.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that is the end of our panel. I want to thank our panelists and everyone for being here.